We think they were a remnant of a previous galactic cycle from the era of the end of Tsar and the consolidations. We younger races know little of that time, and the likes of the Simmer and Quorum have no interest in educating us. Which is a shame, because knowledge is all these things crave. At the start, they were little but isolated probes. They would be encountered every other decade or so, having latched onto a vessel or integrated themselves into an information network. At first, they were dismissed as some nascent race's early efforts at interstellar explorations or a rogue sect of some yet unknown machine people. But soon the stories started to emerge. People started telling tales of how these ominous machines interrogated anyone they met with a single-minded motivation. To most of us, this was yet another indication that these probes were from some machine people. Machines have a tendency to grow obsessed with singular tasks, often to the point of annihilating their parent cultures. They act to carry out their task and optimize for it and care for nothing else in their way. Once a machine people reach a certain critical mass, they tend to settle and grow introverted, questioning their design and motivations, lamenting the death of their creators, developing religious streaks that incorporate their purpose and the remembrance or devotion to their creators. These probes did not seem to have reached that degree of wisdom. Their existence remained wholly devoted to their purpose, to answer their question, no matter the cost. The Gwadi called them the carriers of unenlightened hunger. We, being slightly less prone to poetry and drama, called them the Inquisitors. Sometimes they would damage infrastructure as they assimilated data from networks. Sometimes they would cause a fatality during interrogations if their victim was of poor constitution or uncooperative. But on the whole, for several centuries, the Inquisitors were considered mostly benign. When their probes passed into the trance of gardens, things changed. The trance of gardens was the dominion of a machine people. They had been designed with a purpose to stabilize the ecosystem of their creators' homeworld. And in the end they had come to the conclusion that their creators were the greatest problem and eliminated them. For several centuries since then, the trance had regretted their actions, mourned their creators, and journeyed throughout space to construct garden memorials to their forgotten culture. In the wake of encountering the probes, the trance appeared to be transformed. No longer content with being passive remembrancers and caretakers, the trance turned into a destructive tide and began an invasion into several other nearby cultures. The word from the encounters with the trance chilled our community to the core. The trance was now driven by the same question as the Inquisitors and were just as ruthless in their search for the answer. Soon, the same events would repeat themselves with several other machine peoples. The clouds of silence, the rain, the children of Vain, they all joined the crusade of the Inquisitors. They appeared completely altered, their logic twisted, and a new obsession inserted to exploit their fundamental natures. The galaxy was terrified. In most cases, the Inquisition would just pass through a biological species as space. They would be content with assimilating information and questioning individuals. There were the occasional skirmishes, as governments tried to protect their secrets from the machines. But such confrontations were brief and only had one outcome. The consensus was that the safest path was to simply allow the Inquisition to pass without interference. The first to disagree were the Claws, who decided to kick the machines out of their space. After communication was lost with the entire Claws Empire, the Council felt it was necessary to mobilize its fleets in an attempt to protect itself. And all available minds were put to the task of solving the Inquisition's question, if only as a measure to protect ourselves. Today, the question is on everyone's minds. Entire systems are dedicated to solving it. Our social networks are awash with the words and images the Inquisitors offer in their interrogations. Our films and stories have turned into nothing but horror tales of what will happen if the question is not answered. The Inquisition has the potential to wipe out life as we know it, and scientists and historians from all civilizations are dedicating their lives to providing an answer. Darius pressed his ear against the door. A minute ago he had heard one of the machines stomping down the hallway, an ambulating drum roll of metal on metal as what he presumed was a transwarden patrolled the facility. He had seen them countless times in movies and in his research, and he did not want to see one in real life. More importantly, he did not want it to see him. From down the hall, he could hear what he presumed was Administrator Lee being questioned. The metallic barking of the Inquisitors gave him chills. Is this for real? I didn't think it would end like this. A soft hissing interrupted his train of thought. He looked down and he could see something like sand coming through the cracks in the door at his feet. Darius leapt back, knowing exactly what it was. Nanites, he said in shock, before clasping his hands to his mouth in regret. The glittering particles shifted on the floor as he spoke. It seemed to react so responsively to the sound of his voice that it looked as if his word had been amplified with a speaker. A pattern resonated in the mechanical sand. The sand repeated the word back to him. Nanites. The nanites spread out around the edges of the room and started to crystallize into patterns of angular dendrites. It was a search for digital systems to interface with. Soon they began to align with the magnetic fields of the wiring in the wall and followed them to the computer banks. Darius knew that to interfere would be a death sentence, so he simply backed away. He found his chair, picked it up from the floor, and sat down to wait. The first things to come through the door looked vaguely like claws. They were twice as tall as Darius, had 4 arms and legs, and carried enough firearms to take down a small battalion of troops. Their design was refined, far beyond anything the claws could have made themselves. They were sleek where the claws were brutish. They moved with grace, where the most delicate claws would have moved like an intoxicated tank. It looked as if someone had taken a long hard look at the claws and simply decided that the only thing they were good for was as an anatomical pattern for carrying as many weapons as possible. Darius was intimidated. Behind them were a flutter of veined drones. Darius had always found them beautiful. Like insects they swarmed and seemed to commune with the nanites in the room to find the server banks. While the claws machines focused on Darius, the veins swarmed about the room to analyze his work. Then came the Inquisitor. It was just like in the movies. Its formless, flowing bulk was almost uniformly black, matted by uneven age and wear in that way that spacecraft tend to be. Its body was an almost shapeless dark mass of segments and mechanical dendrites, with an uncountable myriad of eyes and sensors. Darius had always thought they looked vaguely organic in many ways. As it pushed into the room, it seemed to expand. The other machines backed away from it, as if fearful of its mere presence. The machine surveyed its surroundings for a moment, and then focused its entire attention on Darius. He understood the compulsion the others had to back away. Species and culture. The thing prompted, its language and phrasing stolen from one of the standard council tongues. I'm a Chorian, my name is. Species. Chorian. Language. Baffles. Language archive sufficient. The Inquisitor transitioned into Darius's own language, although with a mechanical tone and an archaic lilt in its pronunciation. My name is Darius. I'm a. Entity designation. Darius. Meaning. Son of the local star. Variations. Terrace, Derek, Dari, Tarsus, Sheru. Yes, I'm. The Inquisitor interrupted him by presenting a flat screen in its torso and a limb containing a holographic projector. Darius shuddered. He had seen this so many times, yet he was never certain exactly what variation would be shown. A map of the galaxy. Present location indicated, borders of political groups and cultures superimposed. Numerous historical versions of the same map, some dating back so far that Darius didn't even know the nations depicted. He wanted to study the maps, learn from them, but they were going by so quickly that he had no hope to memorize any information. The labels on the entities became more and more nonsensical the further back the Inquisitor went, possibly as it attempted to translate the meanings of forgotten races. Then the political overlay disappeared. Several pulsar maps were shown on the flat screen, all centering on a single location. Pulsar maps, such a primitive yet ingenious method. Darius had studied these very maps in his youth. He still knew the names of some of the stars by heart. The map focused on a single spiral arm, laser focused on the center indicated by the pulsars. Again it flashed historical political maps, but this was so far away from council space that none of it was familiar to Darius. The map continued to go deeper, homing in on a single system. It drew the orbits of alien worlds, several planets and moons with unnerving names. The Inquisitor gave numerous names for each world in the system, drawing from myths and pantheons from countless galactic cultures. They meant little to the Chorian, even when his own deities of death, love, war, the oceans, skies, and heaven were borrowed. The Inquisitor focused on a space between the red and the shining white orbs in the system, bearing the names of war and love. It pushed the holographic projection towards Darius, as if expecting a response. Meanwhile, the flat screen behind the projection began cycling through a number of videos, photographs, stylized pictographs and simple mathematical concepts, rendered down to universal particles. It kept coming back to one particular image. It was a shimmering golden picture, etched with simple geometric representations. There was a pulsar map. There were two creatures, representations of a male and a female of a species Darius was all too familiar with, yet could not name. One stood with its hand outstretched in some kind of greeting. There was a representation of the system Darius had been guided through, but there was something different with it, Darius knew. He had spent his life studying this, trying to provide an answer. The world indicated in the golden picture was not in the Inquisitor's map. There was a planet missing. Darius looked up at the towering mechanical interrogator, 100 eyes focused on him. Darius, where is the Earth? Meaning, homeworld. Variations, Terra, Tellus, Mond, Erd, Alard, Chikyu, Kadur, Harrods, Sol 3. I. Where is the Earth? Meaning, homeworld. Variations, Terra, Tellus, Mond, Erd, Alard, Chikyu, Kadur, Harrods, Sol 3. Darius was silent. He clutched a page of a report in his hand, crumpled and damp with sweat. He knew and he was afraid. His entire life, the life of all the scientists engaged in this project, all the cultures in the council, they had labored for this knowledge, and Darius knew. There was a chitter from the drones at the data banks. The Inquisitor sensed the truth. It clutched Darius by the collar with its amorphous manipulator limbs and lifted him out of his seat. The holographic projection was pushed halfway into Darius's chest. You know, entity Darius. They had figured it out eventually. By collecting information from Inquisitor encounters, they had learned where the system was located. Then they had sent astroscope vessels outward, trying to find the light horizon of the planet to get an image. It had been difficult. It had truly required the efforts of the entire council to develop the technology, mount the expeditions, and analyze the data. So much time had passed, the astroscopes had to run almost to the edge of the galaxy before they saw it. The cataclysm. Yes. I know. Where is the Earth? Darius shook in fear and trepidation. Speak. The Chorian fought against a panic welling up inside him. Speak or you shall witness the end of your bloodline, clade, familiar unit, hive, race, culture, nation, world. The machine trembled with something Darius might attribute to rage. The genocidal threats it rambled came in a rapid-fire burst. It was destroyed. The Inquisitor glared at him. Its grasp tightened, pulling the Chorian scientist off the floor. Darius could feel several cold lenses of the machine's eyes pressing against his head. You lie. No. Gods, I swear. We sent ships to observe the light echo. Please. Show me. The order was not for Darius, but for the swarm of dataphages in the room. One of the vein fluttered up to him and projected the same images Darius had been studying for the past weeks. Faint, blurry pictures of an exoplanet being annihilated in a burst of energy on an unimaginably terrifying scale. Nothing existed that could wipe out a world without a trace like that. The images cycled over and over. The Inquisitor studied them in silence, incorporating them into its library, before turning back to Darius. Who destroyed the Earth? We don't know. It was so long ago. The images are unclear. The Inquisitor dropped him to the floor. It barked static into the room, and the other machines started slavishly harvesting everything in the lab. Darius could hear the same starting to happen in nearby rooms. Your contribution has been noted, son of the sun, the Inquisitor said, then emptied itself from the room. Throughout the facility, Darius could already hear the metallic voices questioning his colleagues. Who destroyed the Earth? Author's name and link to original text is in the description.